My name is Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Russell.
It's good to be here. I haven't found it necessary to have a drink since January 25th, 1981. I got that right. So we're going to talk a little bit about my favorite step, my two favorite steps, 6 and 7. And I'm not going to make a long thing of this because I really want to give you a chance. I'm going to tell you right now, think of questions. I'll tell you why. I love questions. We have I do a lot of Zoom meetings every day, all over the place. And we have some people here tonight that go to those Zoom meetings. And on Saturdays, we have a workshop. This Saturday was almost 6 hours, right? Workshop was 6 hours. Wow. And I know some people in AA, if they look at their watch, they say, I think this guy's going to go 3 minutes over, so it's not for the faint of hearted, but we get about, anywhere between 70 and 100 people from all over the world. And the first hour or so is music and the hymns and stuff like that on Saturday. And then, and some people come in after that, but I personally think the music is like a great thing. It's part of the workshop. It's part of the workshop. Be able to sit still and listen. And then, we stay on for a while, and then we do certain things, and I speak for a few minutes, about 40 minutes, and then we have everybody in the group gets whatever time they need. I mean, and they're usually pretty judicious about their time, and I tell people they should ask questions because I'm interested in questions. I tell people, you may have a question, you think it's a stupid question, but there'll be somebody in the group that has the same question, the same concern. And you'll ask the question, I'll say, man, that's the question I want answered. And sometimes the best questions, are the people that hold out to the very end, where usually at the very end there's only like 40 or 50 people left. And because you can leave whenever you want, as soon as you get filled, left. But those are the people that really are into it, and they have excellent questions, incredible questions. So I love answering the questions because then sort of like what happens is the people guide the meeting. It's not only necessarily what I'm saying, but they have questions about things that are bothering them. So about the whole thing or something like that. So I enjoy that. So I know that's what you do in this group, and I've left like 5 or 10 minutes, but I'm gonna try to do maybe around 20, 25 minutes or something like that. If it's at all possible, I'll try to discipline myself and on a step that I think is like a phenomenal step. And quite frankly, I think it's the most important step. Don't worry about missing anything on step 6 because I can tell you this, between now and step 12, all you're going to hear is step 7, 6 and 7. That's all it's going to sound like 6. It's going to sound like 12, but it's really going to be 6 and 7. And it's going to sound like 11, but it's really going to be 6 and 7. It's really going to be the steps that separate the men from the boys. It's really going to be the steps that determine whether you're going to make 40 years or you're going to drink before you get 20. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be the separation steps. There's only one separation step, and that's the 6th step. That's the step that separates the men from the boys. First step doesn't separate the men from the boys. The 3rd step in no way separates the men from the boys. One of the problems is people take the 3rd step. You know what the 3rd step is? Now, don't get me wrong. All the steps are important. I've done them all a gazillion times. I've taught them all. I think they're important. But what happens is your perception changes not only because of repeated humiliations in your own life. I mean, when you keep on screwing up and screwing up and screwing up and screwing up, and it's usually the same screw up, different forms, different people, same. There's no like it's not like you commit a defect of character or you commit some sort of sin. You say, oh, man, never done that before, It's usually the same bullshit over and over again because of your personality or defects and stuff like that. My sponsor used to say, he said, Russ, he used to say, I remember one time he said to me, I had about 2 or 3 years, he said, Russ, why do you do the things you do? Why do you say the things you say? Why do you do the things you do? And he's talking about maybe getting upset or angry, whatever the heck he's talking about, that he notices in me, like Dr. Bob noticed in Bill Wilson, when he said to him, what was the last words he said to Bill Wilson? Let's not screw this thing up, keep it simple. Because Bob could see that Bob could see Bill's problem with the 6th step. You can get all mad at me and all you want. I don't really give a shit. You know what I mean? You get to a certain place where, let me tell you something. You learn a lot between 10 years and 20 years. You learn a lot between 20 years and 30 years. You learn a lot between 30 years and 40 years. I mean, Bill Wilson wrote the book of 33 years sobriety. At 23 years of sobriety, he was like sucking on the muzzle of a gun. By his own admission, he was going down the tubes. You learn a lot. When the shit hits the fan and you're walking through the desert for 40 years and you're trying to get to the promised land, you learn a lot when the cancer comes. You learn a lot when the people die off. You learn a lot when over and over and over again the world beats you up. You know what I mean? And many times alcoholics drink and they come back again and again and again. And many times they don't drink, they just hit emotional bottoms. There's a bottom where you get on your knees and you say, God, help me, I need help, I can't stop drinking. There's a first step emotion, there's a first step bottom where you absolutely believe that you're powerless over alcohol. You sincerely believe, and you will do anything to stop drinking. And even the worst critter will take that first step and get a damn sponsor and join a home group and follow directions and do a fourth step and do a fifth step and do all the steps and get better and not drink for 10 or 15 years, 20 years. And then there'll come a time where, having been ensconced in his sobriety and feeling good about his life and sponsoring everything in town and speaking at conventions and doing all this stuff, and I'm talking about me, where you'll get some sort of thought in your mind that you're actually doing okay. And you don't say you don't need God. You don't see God's not important. You say, I believe in God. But you don't think about him a lot. You figure you've got the God thing down in your pocket. You know why? Because I took the third step. I went to the bathroom and I locked the door so nobody would come in off the street and actually see me get on my knees and do this, because I was like ashamed of having to do that. You know how a lot of people are ashamed. They don't want to talk about God. They don't want people to know so I was like, but I got on my knees and I did the third step prayer. And then I read the book. I read the prayer right out of the book. And then I read, the book he says, having done that, we have now completed step 3. So I figured I'd completed step 3. I got on my knees. I said the third step prayer. And a lot of people think that that's the completion of the third step prayer. And I'm going to tell you something. And that's the way it is until they drink again. Because the third step prayer is important. It's something that you have to do, I believe. But it isn't even close to being rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence. It is bullshit compared to knowing heaven as few people know. And it'll never get you to the place where you know peace. Because there'll come a time where, after you're done with your fifth step and all that stuff, and you're sponsoring people and making coffee and doing all the stuff we do and going to the parties and conventions, where you will read the sixth step in the 12 and 12, which is sort of mysterious because it really don't do anything in a sense. It doesn't, that step we talked about this last week, you come to believe that God will restore you to sanity. Well, let me ask you a question. According to the book, who will restore you to sanity? Higher power will restore you to sanity. What's that? Well, when you first come in, you don't really think that's important. At least nowadays, you don't think it's important to know what God is, because people will tell you an A means don't worry about it. That's not the way it was in the beginning, by the way. The first 4 years, it wasn't like that at all. They leave. They say, okay, you're not drinking now. You're on your own. You're on your own because we don't want to force anything on you. We don't want you to think badly of us. We don't want to hurt newcomers. We don't want people walking out of the room. So you're pretty much on your own on the most important thing. You see, I don't know whether you know this in the big book, before they get to the steps, they say there is one that has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. He doesn't say may you find him in 20 years or in 30 years. They say there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. They don't use the word higher power. They say it's God. May you find him now. Later on in chapter of Gnostics, I don't know if you realize this, they say if a mere code of morals, a better philosophy of life, or even the steps, in a sense, would have solved our problem, we'd be sober a long time ago. Didn't solve our problem. That's why we wrote a book that's spiritual, as well as intellectual, whatever you want to call it. He says that's why, of course, we have to talk about God. They didn't say we have to talk about God. And then it says, here's where the problems develop with agnostics. And let me tell you from my standpoint, this is all my opinion, so you say this guy's full of shit. You're free to do that, just based on in my opinion. Anybody that has a problem with talking about God is not a believer. They're an agnostic. They're just bullshit. Alcoholics love to lie to themselves. They tell alcoholic lies. They rationalize. They tell themselves rational lies that sound good. Let me tell you something about true believers in God. Let me tell you about the people that have made God the central fact of their lives, that are convinced that God lives in their hearts in a way that is indeed miraculous, doing for them things that they can never do for themselves. Let me tell you about those people, because I know those people in AA. Let me tell you about those people. They search for meetings where they talk about God. All they want to talk about is God. They never apologize for God. You know why? Because all men of courage, all men of faith have courage. They courageously talk about God. They don't give a shit what you think about them, because they stopped thinking about what you think about them a long time ago. Because you know why? Because they experienced the miracle of losing fear of people and their judgment and economic insecurity. And you know how they lost that crap that you think about all the frickin' time? The way they lost it is because they gave their life to God and they abandoned themselves to God. That's what they did. They abandoned themselves to God. Listen, this is in my opinion, by the way. This is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I really don't know what fellowship you're in. I don't know whether you're in a, I don't know what program you're in, because everybody has a different program. All I know is my program says you abandon yourself to God. Burn the idea into every alcoholic's mind that he gets sober no matter what. He says he trusts God. That's the program I'm in. I'm in the program that says God is everything or he's nothing. What's your decision going to be? I'm in a program where it says there is no middle of the road solution. There's only two roads in AA. There's only two roads. There's the road for believers, and then there's the middle of the road. And I can always, and one of the great things that happens as you get older in AA, when I was 3 years sober, I didn't have guys with 30 years coming up to me saying they had problems. I didn't have guys with 30 years coming up to me and telling me they were depressed. You get around 45 years, all of a sudden you get guys with 20, 30, 40 years coming up to you telling them how much problems they have, how scared they are, and everything like that. And they all have the same exact problem. Every one of them has the same exact problem as far as where they are in God. You know where they are in God? They did a third step. And they said the Serenity Prayer a couple of times. And they never really made a true decision for God. Bob Smith made a true decision for God from the beginning. He was a believer from the beginning. You don't hear much about Bob, but when you read about Bob, like in the 12 and 12 in the big book, one thing about him. He said, you want to know about AA? You got to read the Bible. Why don't you check out Dr. Bob, the Good Old Timers, page 100. I'll tell you another thing about God. He said the books that we found absolutely essential in AA, the books that I studied were 1 Corinthians 13, Sermon on the Mount, and the book of James. I'll tell you another thing about Bob. The first AA meeting ever done was done by Bob Smith. And he put his foot on the rung of a dining room chair, and he read Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. I'll tell you another thing about Bob. Bob is the one who coined the phrase first things first. And if you ask him what it means, he says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. He didn't take the middle of the road solution. He didn't care. I'll tell you another thing about God. It shows how he used to 12-step people. He walked in on Clarence, the brewmaster, Clarence Snyder, who was 35 years old, 135 pounds, in a hospital bed. And the first question he asked him is, do you believe in God? And Clarence said, well, what does that have to do with it? He says, everything. He says, do you believe? He says, well, I guess so. Guess nothing. You either do or you don't. That was Bob Smith. God Smith was, I'll tell you another thing. And he said, well, I do then. He says, good, get down on your knees. You're going to give your life to God right now. And that's when Clarence said, I did what I was ordered to do. There were no suggestions. Now, you may think a lot of people walked out, they didn't give a shit. They were fighting for their lives, and they knew God was it. Now, that was Bob Smith. I'll tell you another thing about Alcoholics Anonymous between 1935 and 1937. If you didn't get down on your knees in front of everybody and give your life to God, you weren't getting in the meeting. They called it the surrender. I'm not dragging this out from the sky. You ought to read some other things other than the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, like Dr. Ivan Good Old Timers. Rarely have we seen a person fail has thoroughly followed their path. Most people have no idea what they were doing the first 4 years. I'll tell you one thing, they weren't reading the big book. And what the book says is the only thing that's going to save you is the one who has all power, and that one is God. May you find him now, not 20 years from now. And what we do in AA today is basically they'll talk about everything in the world except for God. Because they're scared to talk to God. And how can they talk to God? Because most people don't really believe in God. They believe in money, sex, romance, and managing their own lives. So they're comfortable. They believe in comfort and pleasure. That's what they believe in. And so you're not going to have anybody come up to you and talk to you about this stuff. And besides, they won't talk to you about it in meetings because they're scared about what other people think about them. Rare is the bird, and the only great thing I ever did in my life, and I don't know why, because I was attracted to it. They say it's a program of attraction, not promotion. If you want what we have and you're willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready. And I guess I wanted what these guys had, and the guys I hung around were guys like Dr. Bob hung around. Believers. And so what does this have to do with the sixth step? Because after you get through all the bullshit and all the meetings and all the stuff, which is really important, I just want you to know that's important. Don't say Russell says steps aren't important. I used to, believe it or not, teach them and talk about them. I've actually done the fucking steps. You understand what I'm saying? I've actually done them, okay? I want to tell you many times, okay? But let me tell you one thing. You can do the 12 steps perfectly and miss the most important steps. Miss the most important thing. You could miss the great fact, making God the central factor of your life. You can miss being convinced that he lives in your hearts and minds in a way which is indeed miraculous, doing for you what you can't do for yourself. And I'll tell you something about this world we live in. I don't know whether you guys have noticed it. There's a lot of problems in this world. And you know something? Unlike meetings, most meetings, this meeting will only last 1 hour. But unlike meetings that last 1 hour, where I've been to AA meetings these days where they'll go for an hour, talk about problems and all sorts of stuff, and they'll say resentments, they'll quote the big book and everything. You won't hear one person talk about God. Not one person talk about God. They'll talk about saying the serenity prayer and stuff like that, but nobody gets too serious about God. I'll tell you one thing about this world. The meetings last 1 hour. The world and the problems in this world, 24/7 coming at you all the time. And I'm going to tell you something. You could do this world perfectly, not screw up, not say the wrong thing, do the steps, and you know something? Cancer doesn't give a shit. Death doesn't give a crap. The IRS doesn't care. They're taking your money anyway because they actually think it's their money. You know what I mean? I don't know whether you guys are wised up to the fact that no matter how well you do in this world, they still want you to pay rent, and you still got traffic, and all sorts of crap goes on. And unless you, like when I said to my sponsor, she said, why do you do this stuff? You do? He says, I said, that's my personality. He said, Russell, your personality's killing you. And I liked my personality. The way I got angry and sarcastic, I like my personality. He says, it's killing you. So I know how to stop drinking. How do you get rid of your personality? The Bible says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the Holy Spirit. Amen. Be transformed. How do you be transformed? So this is what the 6th step says. This is after you're done with all the stuff and you do it all and you got your double-digit sobriety or your 3 or 5 years. And there's a tendency for alcoholics when things start going well. And for an alcoholic, for the definition of well, if you're an alcoholic, is you're not drinking. Everybody will tell you, no matter how much you messed up, the first thing they'll say is, but you didn't drink. You didn't drink, did you? He says, no. He says, hey man, not drinking is the gold star. And it is the gold star. I got to say that, it's a big deal. If I hadn't gone to the not drinking meetings for the first 10, 15 years, if I hadn't gone to the meeting, if I didn't have the guys coming up to me, he says, you could screw up in any way, but as long as you don't, if I didn't have that stuff going on, I wouldn't be here today.
Right.
But there reached a point, I want to make that clear. So don't go around saying Russ doesn't believe in AA or any of that stuff. But the bottom line is they'll reach a point and there's a reason why there's a lot of people that make it up to 20, and between 20 and 40, if you ever see a countdown, there's nobody around. There's a reason why you will come to a point where you'll have no defense against the first drink. It's got to come from God. And you know something? It doesn't say that's going to happen in the first 24 hours. That can happen when you're 20 years sober. There's a great line by the Apostle James, and he says this. He says, which is really the truth. You'll find out it's the truth. He says, if you really want wisdom, you got to ask God. God will be generous. He'll give you the wisdom. But when you ask, you cannot doubt. There can be no doubt, because the man who doubts, the man who's on the middle of the road, he says that man cannot expect to receive anything from God. He's like a wave in the ocean. He's double-minded in everything he does. He's unsteady. Somebody asked me the other day, says, do you ever doubt God or do you ever lose your faith? And I said, never. I've never doubted God. I've doubted myself 1,000,000 times. I second-guessed myself 1,000,000 times. I've played ping pong and tennis with my mind 1,000,000 times. I never doubted God. And that's not because I'm smart or I know what I'm doing. That's because of what we're going to talk about right now. You know what I mean? Because you got to have some sort of anchor. Because this world's going to hit you when you least expect it. Stuff's going to happen. You're going to be driving home, minding your own business from a meeting, and you get a flat tire, you'll get into an accident. Shit is going to happen. It's going to test you. And then one thing happens, and you're going to be okay. And then 3 things are going to happen on the road, and you're not going to be able to take it. That's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I know you don't hear any of this crap at meetings, okay? At a lot of your meetings you go to, okay? I get that. I understand that. And I'm not even asking you to believe me, okay? You don't have to believe me, because I know how this world works, and I know how this disease works. And I know about alcoholism because I've been through it for 45 years, sobriety. And I've sponsored hundreds of men. And I've spoken to a lot of women. And I've read all the books, not only the book that Bill Wilson wrote when he's 3.5 years. I read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and I read Bill Wilson's essay, The Next Frontier, Emotional Sobriety, when he published it at 23 years in 1958. It was published in 58 or 59. But yeah, about 23 years sobriety. When he was going back into the depression, he said, I didn't understand what was going on. And he said, my real problem was dependency on other people, places, things, my circumstances. And my real problem was depending on Alcoholics Anonymous. See, I've read that shit by your hero, Bill Wilson, who right after he said, the Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this terrible disease I got to keep talking about and telling other people. The golden text. A month later, he went up to Henrietta Seibeling, and he said, Henrietta, I think we're talking too much about God or religion. And Henrietta said, what are you talking about? The only reason you're sober is because of God. If you don't talk about God, you understand what I'm saying? You might as well be the Rotary Club. And he says, finally, Bill agreed. You understand what I'm saying? So I know the Dr. Bob. I know what, I know, and I love Bill Wilson. I used to do a million meetings on as Bill sees it. And he had a lot of great things, and he helped a lot. I also know where he wound up. Using the LSD to see whether that would work out. And I also knew what was going on with his sobriety at 23 years when he said, I got it all wrong. The whole thing is about God. So I know about that stuff. So that's what I talk about because that's the stuff I've been through. So I don't talk to you like your children. Don't drink and go to meetings. You got enough meetings that'll tell you don't drink and go to meetings. I'm going to tell you this. If you ever get to the point where you give your will and your life over to the care of God and you abandon yourself to God and you start going to meetings where all they're doing is talking about God, you'll never have to worry about drinking. I'm just telling you, if you give your life to God and you truly believe that and you become a believer, you will never have to worry about drinking and you won't have to worry and have anxiety like you have anxiety. Because if you're sober and you're not a believer, and you're an alcoholic, I can tell you this. You're living a life of anxiety. You're living a life of worry. Once in a blue moon, I get this feeling comes about me, and it really is once in a blue moon. I can't tell why. Even Bill Wilson said, I can't tell why this happened, where you get this feeling inside where you're, how can I describe it? The best way I can describe it, where you're sort of like unsteady. In other words, nothing bad has happened. Nothing terrible has happened, but you just have a feeling, I get a feeling of unsteadiness, of unsuredness. It's sort of like fear. It's sort of like some sort of feeling like I don't feel like I'm balanced, I'm not necessarily worried about one thing. It's just something I have a feeling of being unbalanced. And here's the strange thing. After I feel that feeling, I remember. I said, wow, Rob. You know what I say to myself? I say, this is the way you used to feel all the time. All the time. Not quite sure of yourself, second guessing yourself. Feeling like there's something wrong going on, but you're not quite sure how you can pin it on, or you can't quite figure it out. Drive that figure of being alone, that loneliness. It's just, man, it'll come on me because I never have that feeling, but once in a while it'll come on me where I feel unsteady, like a wave in the ocean. And it doesn't last a long time, it then leaves, but what I remember is I say, man, I used to feel this way all the time. But when you feel that way all the time, and you got 10 years or 15 years, you don't realize you're feeling that way all the time. This is kind of hard to explain. If you always feel somehow unsure and worried about life and worried about what's going to happen, it's sort of like an atmosphere you live in. You don't really feel like you live in that atmosphere because that's the water you're swimming in. And you say, and you felt that way all your life. The only time you really notice it is when all of a sudden you get to a point in your life where you're at peace with yourself. And you don't feel that way anymore. And it only happens when you trust in God. When you trust God. No matter what's going on, you trust God. And when you feel that way all the time, and the promises have happened to you all the time, and you trust God, and that doesn't mean things are perfect. You could have no money in the bank and still feel at peace. You can have people acting up all around you and still feel at peace. But when you feel that way all the time, then when you get that feeling that you used to feel all the time, you notice it. You say, whoa, what the hell is that? I'm unsteady. And I think there's a step a bottom you have to reach where you realize that you're not only powerless over the alcohol, but it's more than that. You're powerless over the entire world, over the planet. I was talking at the workshop the other day, and I was laughingly sort of saying, I said, I used to sing this song, remember that? Some of you guys might not even know it. There used to be a song. You ever hear the song, I fought the law and the law won?
Yeah.
And I used to sing to myself, I fought the world and the world won. Money, all the stuff that I fought the world and the world won. And there was a guy at the workshop who said, you know what the second verse of that song is? And I couldn't remember. No, he said the second verse of that song is, I needed money, but I had none. I said, holy shit. That's the story of my life. I fought the world and the world won. I needed money and I had none. I needed sex and I had none. I needed a woman and I had none. I needed a car and I had none. That's my entire life as an alcoholic. You know what I mean? That's a crummy life. It's a crummy way to live. So what does this have to do with the sixth step? So here's the sixth step in a nutshell. You ready? By the way, before I get to that, just want to say this one thing. The second step, we talked about this before. It says that a higher power will restore you to sanity, right?
Power greater than ourselves.
Power greater than ourselves will restore you to sanity. It says, you notice it doesn't say when? It doesn't say in 3 months. It doesn't say in 9 months. It doesn't say in 10 years. It doesn't say in 20 years. It says that a higher power, power greater than yourself will restore you to sanity. It doesn't say in 20 years or 30 years. You notice what else it doesn't say? What's sanity? What's sanity to you? You ought to ask yourself that. Because if you're an alcoholic and you're insane, how do you determine what sanity is? What do you shoot for? How do you know when you're sane? How do you know when you're sane? When do you hit that mark? Is sanity having 10 years double digit and still having anxiety? Is sanity having 15 years and still thinking about yourself all the time? Is sanity having a life where you still resent other people and you still get mad and you still get angry and you still feel sorry for yourself? I mean, what is sanity? What does sanity look like? What does it feel like? When does it happen? When does it come upon you? How does it come upon you? How does it come upon you? Does it come upon you when you're one of the boys, or does it come upon you when you're one of the men? Can it come upon you when you're a boy? I mean, I think we all sort of get a little bit of the promises as it goes along, don't we? You say, have you ever experienced, oh yeah, I remember there was a time that blah, 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 and I didn't have any money, but I wasn't worried about it. How long did that last? An hour and a half. You know what I mean? I mean, it's sort of like the promise, they sort of like come into you, and you notice them, and you say, well, this thing really works. And then it's gone. You know what I mean? You're up, you're down, you're up, you're down. That's like the first hour, And, that's that kind of. So when do they come permanently? What does sanity look like in an alcoholic? And when does it happen? And how does it happen? I think that the sixth step is an important step because I think it separates the insane from the sane. I think it's on the road to sanity. I think you can't do what Bill Wilson did, the half measures. You can't do the appendix 2. You can't tell people in one sense that God is the most important thing and you must abandon yourself for God and then write a second appendix because you're worried that people will be mad at you saying don't worry about the God thing. And I'm not even sure he said that in appendix 2, but I know that's what people use it for. People use appendix 2 for the proposition that you can stand up at an AA meeting and say, I'm an atheist. And nobody will say anything against you because we're tolerant. But if you talk about Jesus, they'll beat the shit out of you. You know what I mean? I mean, as soon as you get specific, they kill you. But as long as you talk about God in such a way so you don't have to make a commitment and you don't have to believe and you can treat it like it's not a big deal, you're okay in AA. Giving people the wrong idea that you can do this thing by just mechanically doing the steps, and you'll live a wonderful life, and you'll never drink again, and you'll never get depressed. And Bill Wilson learned that didn't work. You can't love God and mammon. You can't love God and money. You can't love it. You can't put yourself in a position where you abandon yourself to God, but you don't want to talk about it because you're worried about some bozo in the front row who's not even paying your visa bill. You know what I mean? You can't, there's no middle of the road solution. You either make a decision or you don't. You either do a Dr. Bob, and so for the first 20 years, I followed Bill Wilson. For the next 25 years, I followed Bob Smith. That's just my life. So that's my life. That's what I talk about. So what does that have to do with the sixth step? Well, you ought to read it sometime. I love the sentences because the problem with the paragraphs, I'm a lawyer. You give me a paragraph, you give me 15 pages, I'll find a loophole. I'll find something in there that says a loophole. I'll find the word higher power. That's my loophole. That could be anything. You know what I mean? But here's what the sixth step says. It says, this is the step that separates the men from the boys. That means there are men in AA, and then there are children. There are adults in AA, and there are children. And I'll tell you something. You hang around AA enough and you get honest, you'll see the difference between the adults and the children. You know, you'll see the thumb-sucking crybabies, you'll see the complainers, you'll see the angry people. You'll see the defiant people, the chief guy. You'll see the guys walking out of the room, you know, getting all pissed off and everything like that. And you'll see the difference. You'll see the alcoholism in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it says, this is the step. It doesn't say the third step's the step. It says, this is the step. It says, so says a well-loved clergyman. Gives you a good hint where this thing is going. Well-loved clergyman. And then he says, the man and the woman who has done or is doing the sixth step are those men and women who are repeatedly trying to get rid of anything that keeps them from God and allows them to grow into the image and likeness of their Creator. That's the sixth step. Your entire life has to be growing into the image and likeness of their Creator. That means you have to have some idea of who your Creator is. And you have to have a relationship with your Creator, with a capital C, which means God. That means this God that they were talking about in the first part. You see, they say, there is one who has all power. You don't have 10% of the power. You don't have 15% of the power. You don't have 5%. You don't have 1% of the power. Anything that you're doing is good, is right, has something to do with God, like common grace. He says, the one you got to find, this is what you got to do. There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. How do you find him? You should be asking yourself, how do you find him? How do you find that'd be a good question. How do you find God? Don't you think that'd be a good question? So what they think is going to happen is if you work the steps somehow during the step process, you're going to locate him. And you're going to have a relationship with him because the last page says, but we won't know you. He says, we can't be sure of that. Your real reliance has to be on God. That's what it says. Your real reliance has to be on God. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. He will show you who to hang around. He will show you who to listen to. He will show you what the truth is. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. If you got 10, 15 years, 20 years, and you can't wait to get to a meeting where they're talking about problems and drinking and stuff like that, and don't get me wrong, you have to go to those meetings because you got to leave the 9-1, go after the one and try to help people. But the bottom line is, how are you growing? How are you? Well, you see, that's because those people don't need to grow because they're not drinking. And they've done the steps. And they're resting on their laurels. And they're playing God, and they're heading for trouble if they do. You know, you got to understand how all this stuff fits in to a deal. And then it says, you must have a relationship. That's when it says, see to it your relationship is right with him, and great events will happen for you and countless others. Your relationship, how do you have a relationship with God? Who is God? What is God? What does your creator look like? How can you grow in the image and likeness of God when you don't know who he is, what he is, whatever it is, some nebulous sort of thing that you parked into a corner and you don't talk too much about it because you don't want people to be mad at you. And I'll tell you something. If you're upset, if you have problems in Alcoholics Anonymous, where God is on over every step, all over the book, if you have problems talking about God in Alcoholics Anonymous, let me tell you something. You're going to have some real shitty problems in this world. Because if you don't think they like it in Alcoholics Anonymous, they hate it in the world. And so you're going to be worried about your boss. You're going to be worried about so many things. You're going to conquer not drinking, but you're going to be one anxious puppy. And that's what the sixth step is. The man who's entitled to say that he's done the sixth step is focused on and trying to grow in the image and likeness of God. So somebody asked me the other day, how do you form a relationship with God? Is that a good question? Do you think that's a good question? Let's say somebody comes in, well, how do I form a relationship with God? Well, I know Braden here. I have a relationship with Braden. You know what I mean? I know him. I hung around him a lot. We talk a lot. He goes to a lot of the Zoom meetings, a lot of the workshops and everything. I know who he is. I love the guy. You know, I like him. I give him shit all the time. He gives me shit all the time. You know what I mean? If somebody said to me, you know Braden? I'd say, I know Braden. He says, how do you know? I said, I hung around him for years. I hung around with him. I know Braden. You know Roxanne? I know Roxanne. You know? I know a lot of people. I know Stevie. You know, I know Stevie. You can't have a relationship with anybody if you don't know them. So how do you have a relationship with God? You can't have a relationship with God unless you know God. Impossible. Impossible for a human being to have a relationship with God, a serious relationship with God, if he doesn't know God. So how do you get a relationship with God? Well, I guess you'd have to hang around with some people that have a relationship with God. See how they act, see how they talk, what they say. Maybe if I hang around people that have a relationship with God and I want what they have and I'm willing to go to any length to get it, then I'll be willing to do certain things. Now, at 10 and a half years sober, I was feeling like Bill Wilson was feeling. And some guy said, you need to go to Bible study. How do I get a relationship with God? Why don't you read this book? Now, you may say there's a million different books you can read. Fine. You find your own book. I found a book which talked all about who he is, what he is. And he's as real to me as Braden is. And I love that God that I read about. I didn't worry about religion. I didn't worry about religious people. I didn't worry about the one Christian I ran into who was an asshole. That didn't stop me. You know, I became acquainted with the God that I read about. And the people that were real believers and how they treated me and how they acted themselves. And I wanted what they had. And God became real for me. And the more I developed a relationship with him, the more I developed a relationship with him, the less I worried about getting a new car. And the more I developed having a relationship with him, the less I worried about whether people like me or not. And the more I developed a relationship with him, the less I worried about how much money I had, or how much I weighed, or any of this other stuff. All I worried about is having a relationship with him. And the more I worried about having a relationship with him, the less I worried about myself. And the more I worried about having a relationship with him, the more I wanted to please him. The more I wanted to please him, the more I wanted to help other people. Because I knew that's all he wanted me to do, be of maximum service and help other people. And one day I woke up and I had changed. And I didn't change by conforming myself with the people in AA. Because you want to know something? I got to a point, the last thing I wanted is what you have. I had what you had. God forbid I ever go back to what you have. And I found myself transformed. And AA did a great job in stopping me from drinking, did a great job on a lot of areas, let me recognize a lot of problems and everything like that. But the bottom line is, AA was just a veneer. The real deal was getting to know, was the thing they told me in the beginning. There is one who has all power, that one is God, may you find him. Now for me was maybe 10 or 15 years down the road. Now for some people it's 35 years. And some people never find him. They just don't drink and go to meetings, and they get they get what they get. You with me? Now, you don't have to believe a word I say, but the great news is you're going to get to experience this yourself. You're going to get to experience this deal yourself. And maybe one day in your life you'll wake up. Usually it happens after 12 o'clock at midnight. A lot of people figure this thing out around 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning when they can't get back to sleep again. And they'll say, maybe that guy, that crazy guy that talked all about God, maybe he had a point. Maybe that's what the real problem is in my life. So that's all I have to say. I really want to hear if you have any questions or anything like that. That's all I have to say about this.